Okay. All right. So this is good because you're here to learn. So I think you're going to learn some very interesting things from this great panel that we've assembled here today. So the first thing I wanted to tell you is this was actually a topic that I thought was really interesting, and wrote to the 3% conference and said, I think we should talk about this. So about a year and a half ago, Mike Pence was quoted as saying that he was afraid to be with a woman other than his wife, in any kind of context, in a business setting or any kind of setting. And so that generated a lot of interesting discussion among women, because as you think about how do women advance and how do we help women move forward in either business or law or in any industry, it's going to take a lot of mentoring. And guess what? Most of our senior leaders are men. So that was pretty concerning when I saw that, and I thought, well, how seriously are people taking this? And interestingly, there's actually quite a bit of data that says that there is a real Mike Pence effect. So my point here was, how do we get some men on the stage, and I've got 3 brave ones here, to come and talk about this and to talk about how do we overcome the Mike Pence effect. So that's what this is about today. And the reason I have such a strong interest in this is I've been very, very fortunate in the course of my own career to have some really incredible male mentors. And I'm only going to name a couple of them. There have been many, but one of my first ones was Jim Stengel at P&G, and then Chip Bergh, who I think, Joe, you work with now, who's the CEO of Levi Strauss. And I have to say, if it weren't for some of those brave men and women who were my mentors and sponsors, I don't think I'd be where I am today. So I feel like I owe it back to those of you who are in the audience who are building your careers to talk about this, because I think it's really important. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I'm very thankful to have them all here. Start with John Cook. John is the global CEO of VMLY&R. Did I get that right? I got all the letters? Yeah. Just recently became the CEO, global CEO. But he's been with VML since 1996, and it's been a pleasure to get to know you as a part of this, and I'm excited to have him here. And he's got the challenge of going from, I think when he started with VML, there were 30 employees, and you're now going to be managing over 7,000, I believe, across the globe. So welcome, John. Next, down that way is Wade Davis, who is a former NFL player. That many of you might know. He's a thought leader in this space. He's a corporate inclusion consultant and a very proud feminist. So I'm delighted to have him here. I was on a panel with Wade. We just met, I would say, probably a month ago, and I think we're, what do they say?
Fast friends.
Fast friends. BFFs, yes. So I'm delighted, and he had to fly in this morning, as did John, so I appreciate it. And then last but not least is Joe O, who sits on the advisory board with me. He's president and CEO of FCB West, and he's been in the business for many, many years, although he, like me, was supposed to be a doctor, and we kind of let down our parents, so here we are, okay?
She's still trying to get me to be a doctor.
So is mine. So they don't give up easy, those Asian parents. Okay. All right, now we're going to watch me hike up here, which I think is...
I got you.
All right, let me try the other way. This is really graceful. Okay. Wow. They don't make these for short women. Just a diversity comment, just putting it out there. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of, where are we on this journey to gender equality, right? And what's the role of mentoring? So we talked a little bit about what the Mike Pence effect is. What's interesting is soon after, that was done, there were a number of studies that actually looked at, is this really having an impact? And was really scary to me was nearly half of male managers, this is a lean-in study, are uncomfortable in doing basic activities with women. And among senior men, they are 3.5 times more hesitant to have dinner alone with a female junior person than with a male, and 5 times more hesitant to travel for work with a woman alone than with a man. And if you think about what all of that means, I mean, it's hard enough as women. I mean, the stats right now are 1 in 5 senior leaders are women, and 1 in 25 are women of color. So if we're going to make some progress, we got some work to do, right? So, Joe, I'm going to start with you. Where are we in our commitment to gender equality in advertising? What are some of the challenges and maybe some of the wins? I'd love to hear. And what do you think the role of mentoring is in this whole conversation?
Okay. Where are we? this thing is called the 3% conference, right? Obviously, 3% is an abomination of a number. And the fact that we're now at 29% means that there's a lot of good work happening. Leeson, Kat, the team, amazing in terms of the progress you've made over the last 7 years. And yet, we're nowhere near where we need to be. So I think the state of the industry is, at this point, is a lot of good intention, a lot of good talk, a lot of good dialogue, some progress being made, right? But we're nowhere near where we need to be. And I think sort of organizations like this, movements like this, consciousness-raising sort of conversations, difficult conversations, are the core of this, right? Because I think that's the hard part. We all go back to inertia, avoiding the difficult conversations. And I think the difficult conversations are what's needed to actually make change. That's one of your questions.
Role of mentoring.
Role of mentoring. I guess I will use myself as an example because I have a female mentor, and I selected her because she's smart, she's experienced, and I needed to learn how to be a better leader. And so, and I'd never been a CEO of an organization prior to this, and so, and she had been a CEO to 6 different companies. So for me, it was an easy choice to select somebody based on their talent and their experience. And I think what I've learned through that has been, I guess, revelatory in a huge way, because I think you get to a certain point in your career and you think you know, and what you know is going to make you successful in that next level. But the truth is, the next job you have, you're defined by different criteria, especially when you become the CEO of something or leader of something. And you've never had that job before. So to be exposed to a mentor who's been there and done that, to help you sort of walk that gap and sort of bridge that chasm is monumental.
Awesome, thank you. So Wade, I know you've actually been mentoring organizations outside of the advertising industry, including Google, Netflix, and of course the NFL. I'd love to hear kind of what do you think the role of mentoring is in addressing this huge gap that we have, because it's obviously not just in advertising, it's in all industries that women are not making it, and especially women of color.
Yeah, I'll be transparent. I think that we're doing it the wrong way, right? I think that, as you know my answer, I think that we've continually been making the ask of women to do all the work. We tell women to get an ERG, we tell women to get an executive sponsor, we tell women to get a mentor, we tell women to make the business case, and we actually have never created those same types of demands on men, right? We are intentionally burdening the individual who didn't create the problem to turn around and fix the actual problem, right? So I actually think that we should start doing what's called reverse mentoring, right? How do we get women to actually be mentoring the men? Because men should understand that if I'm going to run a diverse organization, I need a new set of skills. I need to be a more inclusive leader. I need to learn how to adapt and flex my leadership style to meet the needs of a new, diverse population. And the only way that men can do that is if they're being mentored by those individual people. Because women, folks of color, walk into rooms with different histories. If I'm a leader and I've historically only hired white men and I've only typically engaged with white men, do I know how to lead this new organization of people? I do not. So maybe those women, folks of color, can actually mentor me, and then I can figure out and say, how do I give them some stretch assignments? How does it become much more reciprocal than me just saying that here's what women need to do? Because what often happens is that we as men start to round women's edges, and they become like us because we think that we're the model of success, and we lose all of the innovation and creativity and all the things that women bring to the actual table.
That's a great point, and I think the mentors that I mentioned, actually, I ended up doing a reverse mentoring for them because they felt like they didn't have the understanding of how to really help somebody with my background and the culture that I came from, and so I think you're absolutely right. I think it is absolutely a two-way street. I want to turn a little bit, John, to you next in terms of expectations of leadership. So it's interesting in survey after survey, and again, to Wade's point, I mean, we could fill the room with all the data, right? But men continue to think the workplace is equitable, more equitable than women do. So clearly, we're seeing it from two different angles. So as male leaders, what is it that we can do, or you can do, to help us get there? And I know that VML has gotten the 3% certification, so congratulations on that. That's a huge accomplishment. So I think I would love to hear from you, and I think to help the leaders in this room, what can you share specifically about the things you're doing, whether it's culture, policy, or frankly your own leadership to help address this?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks. On the certification, that was a year ago, and I remember Lisa on stage, we were up talking about that, and I remember talking, that's a year ago, saying that this is just the start, because everybody comes up to you and goes, congratulations on being certified, and you're in your own organization going, man, we are so far from this. It's a very, for any agencies who are getting into the certification, that you open the book deep, and you learn a lot about yourself, and it's not all pretty. None of it's pretty, actually. So in the first year, I think we've done a good job of going past committees, and it's pretty easy to get a committee together. It's pretty easy to have a program and to brand something out. It's pretty hard to actually do it and put it in the DNA, and we're not there yet, but I think we're getting there. So that's been cool. In terms of what men can do, I think men who generally are pretty good at showing up at, let's just talk about VMLY&R, I can only speak for own, pretty good at showing up at the programs we have, and showing up at things because they care, and there's a little bit of optics to it if you're honest with yourself. Being completely honest, it's what you don't see enough of is just when men get together with men. There's very few meetings at the agencies where it's men getting together where there's no women there and everybody can seriously look each other in the eye as men, with no women there to try to impress that you're on a committee, and say we're having a sincere meeting right now about how to do this right. And I think we can do a lot more of that. It's hard to do. Because you have to take all bias out of it, and I think we can do a lot more of that. Just take the optics out of it and really get together and talk about it.
I love that. Joe, I'd love to hear from you. Kind of, what are some of the things you're doing? Maybe whether it's I know we talked about your leadership team when we were. So clearly, you had an interesting perspective, which I'd love for the group to hear.
Well, I think, we, unlike sort of your organization, we're quite small at FCB West. We are about 3 years old as an organization, even though the agency's been there for a long time. My partners and I took over about 3 years ago, and we were sort of purpose-built, right? Michael Roth has a point of view within the network. My boss, Carter Murray, has a point of view within FCB, and we were hired to do a thing, which was to rebuild San Francisco and to build it in the image of our clients and build it in the image of the philosophy of the organization. And so what we've been able to do is build an organization that, Clorox and Levi's are, two of our biggest clients. They sell to everybody. They sell to red state butts and blue state butts. There are no two different colored jugs of bleach, right? And so we have to have that perspective built into our organization for us to sell to sort of all colors, right? And we also sell globally as well, too. And what that's netted us out is sort of trying to just hire based off of talent, experience, and character. And what we have now is an organization that's 60% women, 60% of our leadership team are women. My creative partner, her name is Karuna Birch. She's amazing. She's Latina, and we've sort of tried to orient ourselves towards how do we help our clients best, and how do we create an environment where the work that we do is a reflection of the people that we have. Effectively. And so, we have, our thing was different because we got to kind of freshly restart the business, right? And it's so far so good. We've been successful. We've been able to turn around the business, and we've been doing some really lovely work for our clients. And it is always a work in progress, though. We have lots to do and we're sort of on the right direction, but we're not there yet.
I love it. To hear about, I think people have to see it in your leadership team in order to be able to feel like they can get there. So Wade, one thing I wanted to ask you that we've talked about before was there's a lesson that you learned in your career from one of your female bosses that I think is a great story. I'd love to, and I think it's just a matter of, it's talking about we're all on a journey, right? And we have to be self-aware to know where we're at in that journey and be open to your point, John, about being open to kind of hear it all and take it in and figure out how you're going to go from there.
Yeah, so I used to work at an organization where I was a director, and one of the women who worked there, I gave her a directive, and she didn't agree with the directive, and we had a little bit of a back and forth, and I called her Sweetie as a way to de-escalate her, because that's what we do to women. We call them Sweetie and Honey when we're trying to, and she looked at me, she said, "Don't ever call me Sweetie." And I was not a feminist back then. I hadn't read Gloria Steinem and bell hooks on people, and I was like, what do you mean? That's a term of endearment. So my boss called me into her office, and she asked me what happened, and she said, oh, she reached behind her desk. She grabbed a book by bell hooks called Feminist Theory from Margin to Center, and she said, read that. And I went home and I read it. For about a week, I went back to her office. She said, tell me about the book. And I said, womp, womp, womp. And she said, oh, read it again. Right? And I left, and I read it a second time. I went back to her office, and she said, tell me about the book. I said, womp, womp, womp. She said, cool, read it again. The third time I read it, I was halfway through, and I realized, I was like, oh, this book is about me. And that was the first moment that I realized that I actually had been conducting myself in the world, treating men and women very, very differently. And that level of consciousness is what I think that men have to grow, and men have to start their journey to realize. So I watch a show by a gentleman named Dave Rubenstein on Bloomberg, and he interviews CEOs and leaders, everyone from Condoleezza Rice to Richard Branson. And I would say 50% of the time he asks a woman, he goes, how do you navigate being a mother, a wife, and a business leader? And he's never asked a man how do you navigate being a father, a husband, and a business leader, right? So, but what does that tell us? It tells us that we are socially conditioned to believe that women's first place is in the home, and that men's first place is in the workplace. And if we don't address that and talk about that openly and honestly, and how that impacts how we treat folks, how we lead very differently, then we haven't started our journey in doing this actual work.
I told you you'd like that story. So Wade, just based on the journey you've been on, what type of leader do you think we need as we look to the future? How do we fix this? Because we keep trying, and the numbers look really, really bleak. As a woman in this business or in any industry, it's hard to feel. I mean, I did not think these would be the numbers as my own daughter enters the workforce. It's a little disappointing.
Yeah, so I think we have to make this issue personal. I think that so I'm not a fan of people asking for the business case. I think the business case is ridiculous. I think the business case is an analytical exercise, right? Because there's no business case for men, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, no one says, where's the business case for men to be leaders? No, it just is, right? It just is, right? So how are we actually giving, again, women more work to do to prove to us men that what we believe about you is not true? Because that's what the business case says. It said, tell me what I believe about you isn't true, right? And here's the truth about the business case. Business leaders have one responsibility. It's to make more money for their stockholders, right? What the data says is that when you're an organization that have 30% more women at the senior level, your business is more successful. That is fact. It's been there since 1980. So if a leader's job is to make money for his organization, and women make a business more successful, and they know that data, why aren't there more women? Because the truth is that it's not personal, right? Right? Is that it's actually not personal to men. And I say that you have to make it personal, because if a man doesn't care here and he's only up here, then you're actually not something that he's going to be deeply invested in, right? So the question is that how do you get a leader that actually sees this as deeply personal to him? And not because he had a daughter, because that's benevolent sexism, like grow up, right? You had a wife, you had women in your family the whole entire time. Like, how do you make it deeply personal to them? And that is the question. So I'm coaching 26 vice presidents at Netflix. And my job there is not to talk about the data at all. It is about empathy, understanding, and education. How do I get them to realize that they have been complicit in creating a system and a world that is holding women back?
Either of you want to build on that?
No. I want
I
Wade
would
to
ask a
answer every
question.
question from now on, ever.
Yeah. No, I would say, can you give somebody care if they don't care? Like, can you put it
Yeah,
in somebody? Because I know you mean it.
So the number one way that I do is we have to ask men better questions, right? And we have to frame the discussion around growth and leadership. Men respond to that. Men don't respond to the idea that we're here to change them or here to fix them, right? So how do I, if I'm engaging you, if I'm your coach, I have to understand your history. Mm-hmm. You have a history that informs everything that you do and everything that you have come to understand about women. So one of the things that we have to do in middle school is start giving young boys books to read about women. because they have grown up believing that women don't have a role in making the world what it is. So if you're 30 and you just now finding out who Lucy Stone is or Susan B. Anthony, it's too late. Like, you don't have a certain belief about women. So we have got to ask men better questions and never ask a man a why question. Ask him a what or a how question, because then he's going to be specific. Asking someone a why question feels like judgment. And there's an assumption in it, but if I say, tell me what,
And
or
we
tell me
women
how.
love to ask why questions, just so
So I
we're
don't
clear.
tell women what to do, so I'm not saying what you all should do, but I'm talking about men.
It's funny on the daughter thing. I've got 3 daughters, and a lot of people on the panel just advise this, like, hey, you're gonna be on this panel. I'm like, yeah, and they're like, make sure and mention you've got 3 daughters. You know, it's like, why? It's to your point. It's like
Should I
some
only
sort of
care because I have
magic.
daughters?
Right. It's like, I don't.
Great. So one thing that's, one of the reasons I chose, or Lisa and I together, I guess, recruited these guys, and they were willing to come and do this, is because they do care. And I think, as we think about, I think 3%'s coined a term called man-ambassadors. These are probably the best man-ambassadors we could have up here. And I think the question I have is, as we looked at kind of the composition, as I look out into this room, and I think as we look at the total attendance for this conference, I think, what was it, Lisa, like 14% of the attendees are men.
Down from 20.
Oh my.
Okay, so my question here is, how do we recruit more men, and how do we get more men ambassadors? Because we know, again, to Wade's point, women are 24% less likely than men to get advice from senior leaders, and 62% of women of color say they lack of an influential mentor holds them back in their careers. Those are real, personal stats, right? So how do we think about, getting more men? And I would love to hear from each of you the point Wade made, which is this is personal. So what is it about it? And John, and I know for you it goes beyond, you've got 3 daughters.
Yeah.
So what is it? And then, how do we then start to think about how do we recruit more men to join us? So there's not just 14% in the audience, because I think it's great that so many women are here, but ladies, newsflash, the vast majority of leadership positions are held by men. And if we can't get them to be part of this conversation with us, things aren't going to change. And so we need more of you joining us. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think quickly it's the man ambassadors, which is a term, but it's
That's a very controversial term,
yeah,
I'm
but
finding.
the men need to recruit the men, I think, a lot more, because I think in our agency it's a lot of, it's almost like the group that is involved in 3%. It's got to be not the group that's involved, but men have to go back and recruit. I think we can probably keep doing things with content here to make it even more attractive. But I think there's something about when the testimony of a man who's been here to say, hey, this is what this is about, you should be here. I think that works really well.
So what made you, because you were kind of a pioneer in getting this certification for the agency, what was the motivation for you?
I think misperceptions of, it's back to what I said about optics. I think because I felt like we were going down a path of the era of checking the box. This is not even in an evil way, years ago. And you could just start to see, we're checking the box. We had a head of cultural inclusion and all these things, and you start to go, we have all the pieces, but does it add up to something? And I think when we wanted to add up to something, it was like we got to start leaning into this, not that term, but this that's a whole other term. But we have to do this right, and so it was that. It was all the pieces and all the things you check the box do not add up to anything unless you really get into it. And this is one of many things.
Yeah, actually, I think for me, I'll take accountability for the first question about sort of why is there only 14% men in here? Because leaders like me aren't pushing the agenda, aren't changing. And because I'm sure that if I asked the men in my office, there'll be plenty of hand raisers who said, yeah, I want to go, because I know this is a thing that's going on, and yet I'm the one who approves who can go to this, because the agency funds it. Right? So I think the dialogue really has to be with the owners of the businesses, and saying, change the dialogue about what you think the 3% conference is, because it's not a problem that the women, Wade, to your point, I'm going to allude to you as much as possible because you're fucking smart.
I learned it from women in all those feminist books, so I can't take any credit.
I'm going to learn from you guys because you're fucking smart. So I think the dialogue has to change, right? It has to start from the leadership level, because I don't think there's any lack of interest from the men within the organizations. I think we have to make it an important thing to not make it a woman's problem, right? And that's not it's also not a women's opportunity. It's opportunity. It's a part of being a part of a dialogue, of a change in a discourse that's important in our industry. It's important in your business, in their business. And I think most importantly, it's important for your personal development as an individual within a company to learn this so that you can be successful within an organization. We have to make it a metric of success, right? That you're not just going to be afraid of women. Again, sort of the Mike Pence effect. It's actually you will flourish because you know how to work well with women. Right? Yeah, I think we have to make it not a scary thing. You have to make it a positive because we go towards the things that help us grow individually and within our careers. So then how do we make it a positive discussion where every man is beating down the door saying, I want to go. I want to go next year. Please, let me send me.
I think this is another honest thing I think that happens in, is the feeling that, an incorrect perception that if you're a man and you're not doing, quote, bad things, that this is some place you come to get trained to not do bad things, and you're like, oh, I don't sexually harass anyone, so why don't you, it's like, no, that's not what we're talking about. I mean, it's honestly out there. I mean, nobody would ever admit that.
Pretty low standard, right?
No, but nobody would ever admit it, but I think there's a lot of that where people just say, I'm a good guy. Do I need to go to 3, it's not some.
We have to get rid of the language of good guy.
Yeah.
No, but I'm saying that's what people. I'm not saying I'm saying that's what it's a mental. I probably have said it. I'm training right now, but you know what I mean. It's like you just feel like you don't need it because you're not a bad guy and that kind of thing. So it's not right.
So Wade, you talked about what you learned from a female manager some time ago. I'd love to hear from each of you, and I'm going to make the assumption you've all mentored women in your organization. What's something you've learned? I think I'm going to let Wade off the hook because he clearly has been on this journey. But I'd love to hear from the two of you. Mentoring is a two-way street, and it's funny, and you can tell Chip I said this when you go back and see him. He and I did a panel on mentoring not that long ago and talked about what we learned from each other. Because if you had put the two of us together in a room, you would have said, "Wow, they're just on appearances or outward." You'd say very different, and we learned so much from each other because we looked at the world from very different perspectives, and he needed mine and I needed his. So to me, the best mentoring is always a two-way street. So any examples of what you've learned from your own personal experiences?
From mentor. I mean, I think from mentoring or reverse mentoring. I mean, very, very tactical, very maybe specific, maybe more than you want to look for. But I remember it's the optics of things that I've worked at the same company 24 years. Now a little bit different company, but and because of that, you spend so much time at work. A lot of you have men and women friends, but some of the best friends that are men, and you might do some things outside of work together. And the optic, just being really honest. When you do that, the optic of a female mentor saying, you don't understand what it looks like if you go and you post a picture of you and your friends at this thing, because and I'm going, well, they're my friends in real life too, and it's like, how do you have, if so many of your friends become your work friends, and you do a guy thing together, again, not a right term, but a term that people use, I think I've learned from a lot of mentors, you can't do that. And it's a very specific thing. It's one of 100 things that I think somebody would honestly tell you if you are open up to listening and you're open to hearing the honest truth about the way things seem or the way things are. It's a big barrier because I think a lot of people aren't ready to listen, but I sure have tried.
I love that one because it's actually the same one. Chip remembers 25 years later me talking to him about the men's running club that the guys had in the office, and there were several of us. Well, there were several guys who weren't runners, and there were a few women who weren't, and it was always like, oh wow, they're talking about business and they're bonding, and you're not part of that. And then there's always, you can't.
It's a real.
Yeah. Yep. Anything? Oh, go ahead.
No, so what I don't want you all to think that I get it better than these two. Right? Just because my language may be different and I do this for a living, right? It feels like I'm at a different level. All men, even someone like me, should be on a one-day contract, right? That I may be amazing today, but tomorrow it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter, right? And I say that because I don't want men to feel like if I'm not be able to talk like Wade, then I can't do this work at all, because that's not the point, right? The point is that you've got to start your journey and your growth somewhere. Because men get afraid that they go, oh, I saw that guy, I'm not that. No one wants you to be that. What they want you to do is figure out what actions can you take, right? I screw up all the time. I have a team of 9 folks that I lead, and I just hired my first guy, but that's not important. But the truth is, right, is that I lead in a way that I create the conditions for everyone on my team to offer me a critique. So what that looks like is probably a month ago, the First Lady of New York City, Shirley McCrary, asked me to be on her panel. On a committee for something, right? I get off the phone, I call up my team, and I say, the mayor's wife wants me to do something for her. And someone on my team says, who? And then I go, the mayor's wife. And she goes, still don't know who you're talking about. It clicked. Oh, this woman actually has a name, right? I give you that story to show you that I'm not perfect.
Not sweetie.
And, yeah, and the goal, yeah, right? No, but I tell that story so I don't want anyone to think that we as men have to be perfect. The job is to start your journey. Like that's the job, like that's the action. Like don't be afraid to even start it. Don't be afraid to have a conversation, right? How do we go from calling men out to calling them in if they're actually starting their actual journey? Like that's the work, and it's not. And I don't want you all to think that I'm the model. I'm not. I'm on my journey too, and I'm further along than you. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, don't make me follow that up. This is just not fair.
I know. I think I'm going to owe Joe dinner, right? At a minimum. So, I want to transition to this notion of idea of, we're all on a journey, right? But for the men that are out in this audience, I would love for us to talk a little bit about what is it that they can do starting tomorrow? Because, I hear you. We're all at different points in this journey, but we got to take some action because it feels like we've been talking about the same thing every year. And we're continuing to look at the stats, and they're not getting that much better. So, I gave you guys a little bit of time to think about this in all fairness. So I'd love to hear from each of you kind of what is it that you would tell the men out there who are afraid? Because I think there is a lot of fear about what if I do the wrong thing, say the wrong thing. I think that's where that Mike Pence effect is actually coming from, is people are fearful of doing, tripping up and doing something wrong. And I think it's scary, right, to take that leap. So I'd love for you three.
Joe's going first.
Joe's going first.
Or maybe I screwed you.
No, I'm good. I'll take that. I think there's a couple things there. There's number one, the fear is about you, not about the other person, right? Take accountability and ownership of that fear that you have, because that's about you and your question about yourself, whether you can control yourself, whether you can be a decent human being and not assume that woman across the table or the woman flying next to you wants to sleep with you. There's a base level assumption that sort of you have to sort of figure that out for yourself and figure out sort of understand the fact she's a professional like you. She has a job, she has a family, she has a life, and she doesn't want to sleep with you, number one. I think number two, I think the big thing for guys right now, so I'm reading a book I'm sure lots of people have read called Sapiens. It's a terrific book about sort of how human beings have evolved. And sort of it wasn't really about just the thumb or the brain or anything like that. It was our ability to create abstractions in the world that brought people together, right? And it's our ability to sort of connect together off of that. I think the big thing for guys is to understand that we have to accept the fact that these abstractions, these things that are our creations, right? The sort of the way we treat women, the way we talk to one another, and this abstraction that we call the good boys club and the locker room and boys will be boys, doesn't fit in the future anymore. It just doesn't. There's no place for it in the workplace. Oh, look, they applauded for me too. I'm going to store that in my heart. Take that, Wade. No, I think it's really important because I think ultimately it's about accountability for yourself, accountability for who you are and what you do, and the way that men interact with one another. I think that and because as we say, when it's men just hanging out with men, you fall into the locker room thing, and like that's a dude thing. But when you put yourself around other women and you can't get away from that, you have to learn to live in another way. That's why representation is so important. You can't pretend to know something; you have to live it. So,
John?
Yeah. No, I agree completely. I'm equally scared to answer anything, but kidding. I can always speak from personal experience about whenever I have tried to be better myself at something or have others in the organization be better. It's about putting yourself out there, be willing to tell honest stories about the real things that really are barriers. I think there's two too much politically correct talk with men who will say, including myself sometimes, where you say what you think needs to be heard, and you put yourself out there and tell the real thing you're facing. Like the fact you have guy friends and there's basketball night on Monday at VML, and you're like, but it's causing an issue. And but some people just, I've always said, let's put it out there and say, is this an issue? You know, and it's like, it's always worked for me just to put it out there, to be honest, and have, if I was giving advice to some other men, which I'd hate to, be the, the authority on it by any means, but it really works just to ask the real questions, the real optics, and go that extra ounce deep on what's real, and it works well.
They said it all.
They said it all. You're good.
Good.
So wait, I'm going to start with you this time. But I mean, I know we talked a little bit about, women have been kind of carrying the burden on this. But is there anything, from your opinion, we should be doing differently to advance this, to move this further? Because I think we've got to be open to that too, right? I mean, I hear you, but is there anything that comes to mind that we should be asking women to do differently?
So you're asking me to break a rule of mine that I never tell women what to do in this movement. I will say something that's probably dangerous to say in this room, but I'm going to say it anyway. I actually don't think we need a women's empowerment movement, because the idea that you need to be empowered means that you didn't have power. It's not that women don't have power, it's that we've created a world that says that women need to be empowered, right? I know that's dangerous to say in this room, but it's the truth, right? If men having power is the norm and we have to empower women, women are still doing the work. I don't want women to keep doing the work, so I want women to flip it and say, actually, men need to do the work, because you're the reason that even an empowerment movement even needs to exist. Right? Because we don't have men's empowerment movement because the assumption that men already have power. So my thought is, don't do work that you don't need to. It would be
I'm
my.
good with that. How about the rest of you? All right. Any other thoughts or anything we didn't cover? We've got a few minutes left, so if there's any questions, we'd be happy to take them. But I think we've had some great conversations, so I just want to take a minute to thank Joe, John, and Wade for being here. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate it. Any questions? I don't know if do we have mics anywhere? Or we can pass them out, or you can shout it out.
Chicago, I can be Oprah. I'll run around.
Yeah, you can be Oprah. Anybody?
Oh, there we go. We got
Mike.
You got it? We got one.
Hi, I'll stand.
Hi.
Thank you for the conversation. It was really, really interesting and relevant, obviously. Trying to think of how to ask this question. So there's a lot that's really important about taking personal accountability and changing the way you act as a leader. And then there are policies that get put into place as an organization that require, agreement across the board, from the rest of the leadership team, from board members, from advisors, et cetera. How do you go about, as sort of independent ambassadors, advocating to the rest of your organization for actual policy changes beyond, step one is everyone, again, taking independent actions to be more progressive, to be more inclusive. Step two, or maybe in parallel, is institutionalizing that change for the broader organization. So how have you gone about doing that successfully?
So I don't run a business that's like that, but I can offer something that I advise companies on. So one of the things is you've got to educate the leaders about the actual barriers that women are facing, right? So specifically the idea that if you're down to 5 candidates and one of them is a woman, the chances of her getting hired is the same as if there were no woman, right? Men have to know that so that they put policies in place that says for the last 5 folks, 2 of them have to be a woman. You can put that policy in place. Another thing that organizations must start doing is putting a framework around the interview process. Far too often, leaders say, well, the reason I didn't hire this person is that they weren't a culture fit. What does that even mean, right? Or they'll say things like, I didn't really connect with that person. Those aren't valid reasons. There actually needs to be a framework that says, like, this person doesn't have environmental radar, this person can't spot, this person can't do actual, real, tangible things that relate to this job. If those things aren't in a company's, like, policies, if that is not something that they have to do as a part of their hiring, thing, then we will never actually change it. It can be also something as similar as a company saying that I'm going to partner with an HBCU alumni association, like to put real tangible strategies that are baked in to their overall strategy. Because if diversity and inclusion is thought of as a luxury or this thing that's over there and it's not baked into their strategy, then it's actually always going to be something that is thought of secondhand.
I think just from the company, particularly from a consulting to the company perspective, I think it's just a small thing that's worked really well for us has been when we've changed or added policy, not just in this category, but in any, it's always more successful to explain why we did it and what the options were that we considered when doing it. And it's not every single policy needs that, but I've just seen good traction when our teams have put out why this policy existed and why it needed to change and what we're doing and the kind of feedback that the organization got that made it change. Not to justify it, not to explain it, but just to kind of talk about why it exists. It's been a really good thing internally for us. We changed parental leave and made that dramatically longer and kind of just, instead of that just popping up, we're not trying to merchandise it and say it's really cool that we have it. We try to say why that exists and why that's important to us, and that's helped a lot.
I've been really lucky that I run an organization that philosophically aligns with a bigger idea of just doing the right thing, right? And so a lot of what I do and what my leadership team and I do is just try to decide what we feel is the right thing to do for our organization, for our people, and most of the time, the network agrees. I can't think of a time where they didn't. And so, what we try to do is essentially just gauge topic by topic, sort of issue by issue, and gauge what we think are right. Check with HR, check with legal, and make sure that it works. But ultimately speaking, we just try to go back to the old sort of golden rule: do the right thing. And I know it sounds really super simplistic, but if you go by that, and you have the ability to have a dialogue with your employees, and they can call you on it, are you doing the right thing or not? And if they have the safety to be able to call you on it, well then, you'll know whether you actually live by it or not. So.
All right, on that note of doing the right thing, I want to thank all three of you again for doing.
I just want to add one other
Wade
thing.
wants to get
I just
the
want to
last
add
word.
one other thing, right? And this is honestly and truly, we also have to embody the work of Kimberly Crenshaw and be truly intersectional. Far too often, and I'm going to be very transparent, far too often women of color are left behind in these conversations, right? And we have to also be honest and talk about the anti-blackness that exists in organizations and exists in even all movements. And if we're unafraid to have that conversation, then there's no reason to do any of this at all, because the group who is the most marginalized will be left behind.
I love that. So I think we are going to leave you with the thought to not have fear, to have these conversations, and to lead with empathy. I think that's what great leadership always does at the end of the day. So thank you very much for your time and for joining us today.